Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life.
Brendo, how are you, mate?
Sorry to disappoint everyone out there. Brendo ain't here. This is
Brendo,
Gaz.
guys, how are you guys? Yeah, Brendo is not here, and we have just had about 20 minutes worth of dicking around with Zoom. Sorry, guys, that's all on me. Brendo will be
Oh,
shaking his head, but he's taking the night off for a birthday party.
no need to apologize at all. As a matter of fact, I was going to ask how Brendo's going as far as what was revealed regarding the heavy tension,
Which
giving
part?
up the Londoners,
Oh,
giving up the cigarettes.
oh yes.
It's not the kind of thing you budge him about, hassle him about.
Yeah. He was no, he was okay the other day. I forgot to ask him today, or so I did see him earlier on today when he came around to drop all this stuff off, but I didn't ask, but he seemed okay, so maybe he's had one. I don't know.
Who knows? He could be a man on the edge, and maybe the tech
He,
issues
he
earlier
may,
might have triggered him.
guys, do you want to introduce yourself, mate, rather than
Yeah, sure, mate. Yeah, so I'm Gaz, Twitter handle Gaz Larking. So I guess you could probably say I'm a Bitcoin pleb, if such a term exists. I'll tell you probably a bit about myself, background. I yeah, basically it's I guess the Bitcoin story is probably I come from sort of a value investing background. I was sort of tertiary qualified in accounting and finance, and then did computer systems engineering.
Mhm.
And so that was, and then drifted into value investing. There's probably be links into why you would do that, but that's probably the limitations of a fiat system, which makes everyone need to be an expert in investing so that they don't lose their work, as we know. But
Yes.
yeah, that was sort of my journey. I sort of was pretty big into value investing, a lot of background reading and that sort of stuff, just about everything I could get my hands on. So that's pretty much what led me to Bitcoin. And that's probably where we take up the story. I could tell you a little bit more about I worked overseas a fair bit. Um, I was working in PNG, spent nearly 10 years over there as an IT manager for a company up there. So did a lot of stuff up there. So yeah, probably pretty technical background.
So, when was it? I guess when were you first aware of Bitcoin, and then when did you actually sort of start digging?
Yeah, it sounds a bit common, like a lot of folks that you'll hear ask that same question. You have your touch points, you hear about it along the line, don't take it seriously, think it's a scam. But listening to Brendo and just previous episodes, I think I probably got in around about similar time to him. So late 2019, I became aware of it and started doing the deep dive at late 2019 into 2020.
Yep.
And it's literally been nonstop since then. It's
But
yeah, crazy.
that's pre-COVID, a bit just slightly
Oh
pre-COVID, I
yeah,
guess.
yeah, very much pre-COVID. We were doing a job up in Kazakhstan in March 2020, just when everything was going down.
Hmm.
So 3% of people in Brisbane had masks on, and 95% had them up in Seoul, which is sort of transit over to Astana.
Ah, right.
'Cause
Okay. Okay.
we do a
And
lot of international projects with the work that I do at the moment.
got you. But did that mean you had to come back? Did COVID mean you had to come back? And you're
Yeah, yeah, very much so. It was crazy. Some of the stories that were happening around that time. Because one of our guys was transiting through China, and
okay.
full hazmat suits on the plane, and I'm getting the reports as a project manager, and you deal with all issues, and here's one. There's an
Yeah.
outbreak. Might not get off the plane here. No one knows what's going on. So yeah, we bugged out and
Well,
back to Oz.
did
Pretty
did
pretty
that
crazy time.
did that then mean did that free up time for you, or did that create work for you? Like, I'm sorry, what I'm trying to get to is like, how
Mhm.
did you started digging on Bitcoin, but why did you all of a sudden make the time to dig?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and probably got to give a shout out to an ex-work colleague of mine who, and it's a fairly fundamental question, isn't it, about what attracts people to Bitcoin from all walks of life, and probably if nothing else on this particular discussion, you just take an average person like myself with my particular background and see the journey into Bitcoin and what is it that resonates with some people and not with others. But in this instance, it was a friend of mine, work colleague, who knew that I was pretty big into value investing. And
Yep.
he simply asked, and I used to lay a little bit of, you know, good natured ribbing about how's all that crypto stuff going
Yeah.
way back then. That's all I knew. And, he took it really well. And then he's a very earnest fellow, Dirk. Shout out to Dirk if he's listening. And he basically said, Gary, here's a challenge for you. Answer me this question. What is Bitcoin?
Okay.
Because he'd seen my approach to a few different things. And that's all it took for me to
So
launch on a journey, 4 years.
okay. So
Yeah.
a big wide open question that you probably, when you first heard it, thought, shit, I don't know. And you started just looking. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, it's fair to say, like if you sort of see a lot of different topics in your travels, and you discount a lot of them, maybe because you haven't heard enough about it, or maybe it just looked and felt like a scam, maybe smelt a bit like a scam, maybe some association with some of the crypto stories going around. But the summary is you just didn't really take it that seriously, except you had one person who took it very seriously and sort of said, no, listen, you might want to look at this. And
Okay.
that was about it.
So is there something about Dirk particularly, just like it's just a guy you respected? Is that so?
Just a fellow, yeah, you know what it's like. You keep on good terms with some of your ex-work colleagues, and
Yep.
and it was literally like that. I was just having lunch with him just to catch up because we weren't working together anymore, but just a good guy, and yeah, and in a very earnest fashion, posing that question to me, and it's hard to. I mean, it would have been very easy to just sort of say, "Yeah, I'm not interested." Next,
Mm-hmm,
but
mm-hmm.
there was something that struck a chord. And so I started wondering how I can even find out about this particular topic. And I think it's quite an interesting one because literally I had no idea. Like a lot of
Yeah.
folks, when they first come across this, where do you go from here? So it started for me with podcasts and and books like I said earlier regarding value investing. All right, here's a topic I don't know much about it. Read.
Mm-hmm,
My
mm-hmm.
dad used to tell me, if in doubt, read the instructions. So you try and find somebody who's courteous enough to write some instructions.
Yeah.
And I then, there was some books that were coming into play, and quite clearly the Bitcoin Standard was one of those things. But more than that, podcasts. Like I was never really a social media type guy
Yeah.
prior to that, and I would say I'm still not, but yeah, very much I am.
You are.
But only because of Bitcoin. I don't
Yeah.
care about taking photos of my lunch,
No, no, no.
or of me working out like some guys do.
Yeah.
But anything to do with Bitcoin, it's interesting. And what you used to hear on the podcast was somebody saying something about Twitter, and I thought, well, what's all that about? Like there was a conversation going on that I knew nothing about.
Mm-hmm.
And then lo and behold, there's the people who are actually on the podcast, like yourself, obviously, as an example. But, all the others, like the Preston Pishers of this world and just guys who, if they talk, you want to listen and
Were
they
you
give
a
it
pod?
time.
You were a podcast listener already, or
No, no, not
okay,
at
okay.
all. Just basically, it's how am I going to find out about this topic? And I don't even remember what even introduced me to it. It was, because I recall quite clearly, I only ever used to listen to music, when, running or going to the gym or doing something mindless on the lawn. And then all of a sudden, I think I might have heard my first podcast somehow. Might have even been a YouTube thing. And then
Mm-hmm.
you hear about pod through that. and that was kind of it. Some of the early stuff, this was just when Michael Saylor was sort of breaking onto the scene, and when you hear a guy like that speak, it's fairly compelling. So it's just logic analysis, and with a very keen sense of like a bullshit detector, like a scam detector. Yes. You know what I mean? You know exactly what I mean, because if people try and make a big song and dance about something like with an obvious sales pitch, it just smells wrong. And so I had the detector very firmly on at that point. Search, and probably still to this day, still searching for those things which I'm missing. You think you know something about a topic, but maybe I'm just missing it. What is it? So more research, more tangents, more rabbit hole.
It's all these things that that's what I found, is that all these things that I thought I knew about, I really had a really superficial knowledge, and that knowledge wasn't really based on much when I actually critically looked at it. And it, all of a sudden your bullshit filter is going off for yourself. And you're going, oh, I'm parroting stuff that I really have no primary research on whatsoever. And then once you realize you're doing that, if you are a sort of critical, hopefully a sort of critical thinking, thoughtful person, you're like, oh shit, I'm going to look like a fool if I don't look at this. So I have to look.
But it comes full circle back to what is it that's within you that actually makes you want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that is different for different people. And that's another one of the fascinating tangents of this. But continuing on that particular narrative, so, the progression from what's this whole concept? How do I learn something about this? So books, maybe a little bit of YouTube stuff, into podcasts. And then that leads into Twitter. And then came the real bit, because that's when you find there's actually some real humans somewhere around, hidden behind avatars and the whole anon thing, which, I didn't actually know that much about at the time. But, guilty as charged. It is what it is. But it hasn't really bothered me too much. But that's when you find there's some folks around the place and they exist in real life. And as luck would have it, here in Brisbane, there is actually a fairly good Bitcoin scene, and through various means, I managed to find these guys. And that, I reckon, is probably one of the biggest things. If someone's listening to this, how do you actually find people in real life? And for me, there was the meetups in Brisbane, and as it turns out, they're really only advertised, I think, on Meetup, that app called Meetup.
Yep.
And so I think Ben did that here, and Wiz, and but I came across it through Twitter via Wiz, and as luck would have it, he happened to be in the same city, pure coincidence, and get along there, and there they all are, all these suspects, and you sort of wonder, wow. And it's almost like it's an expression Wiz likes using, find your tribe. Yeah. And all of a sudden, there they all are, and all they want to do is talk about Bitcoin. And everybody else outside those circles really don't want to talk about Bitcoin because they don't care, and they have not done any work, and they're not really inclined to, because for whatever reason, their mind isn't attuned that way. And that's the bit, still a mystery to me, why some folks are attracted to it and others are not.
You say the Bitcoin Brisbane meetup is only on Meetup, and Twitter. But do you think
that's my knowledge?
Yeah, yes, yeah, but that's the point, isn't it? That's what you're aware of. So is that also a good thing? Like, is that because then the people who actually do manage to find their way there are genuinely keen when they arrive? Or do you think we've got a responsibility to try and reach out further into the community of people who don't really know what's happening here?
Yeah, it's a fair question. That was discussed. That was one of the things that they were talking about at the Bush Bash, because, I mean, that was the progression from the Brisbane one. Then you learn there's an Australian one. And so, I've been to a few of those since, and they're top shelf, just nothing but quality signal and good people. One of the things discussed was about things like TAFE courses, or how does the average person, just someone like me, find out more and actually get to meet people like this. You're not going to find out via mainstream media. All you're going to hear is a confluence of Bitcoin and crypto, because most of the journos don't know the difference. So I've discovered. That's another one of my one of the little things to keep myself entertained. Whenever there's something going on that you read in the Financial Review or something like that, you actually seek out the columnist who's on Twitter and correct them in a good-natured way. You don't want to, be that guy.
I'm not always good-natured, but yeah, thank you for being nice.
Well, it's pretty easy to eliminate that irritation from your life. Block, see ya. So I try to keep it civil if I can.
Good for you. You're a better man than me.
Well, I haven't quite got to. I try not to. I've got to the full toxic zone, but probably depends on the individual, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, how do people find out about it? Like, say you find Bitcoiners in real life. I mean, honestly, I have met a few people who've gone along to those meetups, and they said they just did an internet search, and that's how they found it. Mm-hmm. So maybe not massive difficulty there to find. I don't think it probably should be difficult, because what happens is that you get a lot of folks who they just fall into all these crypto scams. They get them in there and they just try and sell them something. Maybe that'll die its own death. I don't know, due to some of what's going on in the US with the Howey test and the SEC stuff, where they're really coming down hard on that. But for now, it's still there. I just saw a thing this afternoon about what was it? Staking, ETH staking. They're looking to make that illegal over there. So anyway,
you saw Brian's post, did you?
Oh, mate, it's just another tangent.
That's it. There's thousands of different ways we can take this. So, what have you? So you've been to multiple Brisbane local meetups. What else have you been to in the sort of the meat space world?
Well, look, to my knowledge, there really isn't very many. Obviously, you've got the first one coming up in the Sydney conference, Bitcoin Alive.
Yeah, you're going to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it'll be it'll be kind of interesting to see, the difference between that and the Bush Bash.
Yes,
I suppose.
Yes.
But it's all new for everybody, and but I think it's fantastic that they're actually going out of their way to set something up like this and make it a destination. And with that being advertised, it probably answers the question: how do you find out about Bitcoin? Well, you find a lot of Bitcoiners at something like that. I'll be very interested to see who fronts up to that, actually, whether there is actually any genuine mainstream interest, or whether it's just a bunch of Bitcoiners. I don't know. But I don't mean that in a nasty way, just a bunch of Bitcoiners.
No, at all. No, it doesn't.
It's always fantastic. But, mainstream media, like your traditional finance journos, those sorts of folk, sometimes you feel like it's a bit, isolated and very much a niche, but such an encompassing topic. So time will tell.
It's it's going to be very interesting. I'm obviously a big fan of what the guys with the Bush Bash do. They don't like to call themselves organizers, but the Bush Bash people who go. I love it. It's wonderful, and I've not been to them all. I'd love to go to other ones, but I am also interested in going to the kind of big conference thing as well, just to see the difference. For sure. Because I think
just to see everyone in one place, because you don't always get, like, as you were saying a moment ago. One of the good things about the Bush Bashers is they actually put them in a difficult location, a hard to get spot, which is just fantastic for mine. You've got to put effort in to get there. And so if you've got something sitting in middle of Sydney, you probably get a few tourists, and we'll see how that plays out. But that's not saying that's a bad thing. It's actually needed, absolutely needed.
I mean, ultimately, Brendo and I speak about this regularly, and I've spoken to Merrick about it with his pod. Like, people are going to connect with different people. Like, something that you say is really going to resonate with somebody, and then you can speak to somebody else saying exactly the same words, and they are not interested in what you got to say. So there needs to be lots of voices out there, and it needs to be done in every possible. It needs to be through culture, art, music, podcasts, conferences. Just they sitting next to the guy you work beside, because people are going to connect in different ways. And if we're genuinely wanting to pull people into the movement, or at least pull people in is probably the wrong way. Like give them something to start on and let them decide if they want to. I think we need all sorts.
Oh, mate, there's a cracking topic right there on its own. Because you're basically talking about adoption and how that works. I mean, getting people in. Look, any person who's actually been in Bitcoin for a while will probably see, changes in themselves in what Bitcoin does to them. And also they go through stages, I reckon, of wanting to just tell everybody about what's going on. It's like some sort of evangelist, and like the term you use, which is what, bring them in, like Scientology, like
absolutely
Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like you hear about orange pilling people, how are you going with your orange pilling? And it's sort of after a bit, you say, hey, you know what? Just get it out there that this is a topic I'm interested in, but I'm not going to go banging on your door. I'm sorry. Yeah. It's just not going to happen because you just don't want that guy who loves medieval sword fighting to come and say, man, you've got to get along. You absolutely have to. There's only so many ways you can say, you know what, I'm not that interested.
Yeah, my wife did mention these things to me a few times. You do get to that point, and you are that. I was that guy standing on the doorstep.
I'm sure I heard that someone wrote a book about how to deal with being a Bitcoiner, how to blend into society.
Wow.
Did you remember that?
No,
I don't even know
I should have.
My imagination.
If nobody's written that book, that's a great idea.
Because you think about it, everyone's the same. And it's like Larry Lepard, like that guy is fantastic. But one of the things you hear him say is he's going to a party and his wife says, no, not this time.
Not tonight,
not with
Larry.
These people. Not this time, not with these people. And he says and goes, well, I'm me. And guess what? That's what's going to go down. And so next thing he's on the pulpit.
It's really
preaching the good word.
Yeah, it's really, really hard. And like, I'll consciously from time to time go, do you know what? Go listen to the radio, go watch the telly, go pick up a newspaper and see what other folks do. Right?
Yeah, but not mainstream media. You'll just do your head in.
I know, but you have to. I think you do have to still be aware of where other people, like where they're at.
Oh no, I hear you.
So, I can watch. When was the last time you tried listening to the radio? I mean, it's
actually I listen to the radio all the time in the afternoon. But I'll tell you what. Here's a hot tip for everyone listening.
Please.
There's a radio station called Rebel FM. It's on the Gold Coast. Now you wouldn't believe this. I hop into a rental car up in Weipa. We were doing some work. I work in the mining industry, and we got to go to some pretty crazy places. And I'm up in Weipa.
I don't even know where Weipa is. Where's Weipa?
Well, Weipa, WEIPA. It's right up a tip of North Queensland.
Okay.
We've got bauxite operation up there.
Okay.
And so I hop in the car, and they're just playing this absolutely crazy good music. And for me, I like sort of hard rock and that sort of stuff. Yeah. And I'm hearing this. Well, what? In Weipa, it's like the middle of nowhere. What's going on? I find out that there's this radio station on the Gold Coast. And they've got relays all over Queensland, which is interesting enough. But they've got an internet feed, and anyone across the planet can tune in. rebelfm.com. Don't worry, I don't get any endorsements or anything. And so I just turn it on, like when I'm doing work, and you just hearing. That's the only way actually I hear what's going on with news or anything in the middle of radio like that. But they don't do it in such a way that, makes you not want to listen to it, put it that way.
I mean, it is interesting when you look at the stats, though, of like mainstream media versus like Rogan, for example. And we all talk about being concerned about this mainstream narrative, and it is a problem. But that's not where the ears are, the eyeballs are. They're on Rogan or.
Well, it's interesting. I was just discussing this on the weekend with my brother, who he drew the distinction between news and current affairs.
Yeah,
and he said, don't confuse the two. Yeah, and if you think about Joe Rogan, he's very much current affairs, and or at least some version of that. But I like the style. I love the deep dive. I love the deep dives. They are fantastic to actually get into the meat and potatoes of a subject rather than just the clickbait, the 30-second superficial. But that's just me. Or maybe it's not just me. It's got a lot of listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I just think we all need to cast the net as wide as possible and try and listen to other things. But it is madly frustrating when you get into some mainstream program and you just spend the first you're lucky if you make it a few minutes before you're just shaking your head. But I don't think people are spending. I mean, I guess, but a lot of people are spending their time in Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, which is probably not very helpful either. Definitely not very helpful.
Yeah, but you raise a good topic though, because if you sort of tune into that, and let's face it, before any of us really took a deep dive into Bitcoin, we're all just pretty normal people. I like to think we're pretty normal still, but just happen to have this passion for Bitcoin. And you kind of find yourself looking at the world through that lens. And then, as you were just saying, you turn that around and you look at it, you go through school, they never teach you about money, but they teach you that you got to go to work. And to earn money, you've got not equipped with any idea about what to do with it. And that's the whole thing. And most of these folk, you see it all the time. They're just poorly equipped for the world around them. And they run into a lot of problems, debt, credit card debt. And then you start seeing interest rates get jacked and people can't figure out why. You see inflation, people can't figure out why. And they're just, I'm not saying like I'm an all-seeing authority to it, but I mean, you read a lot about this sort of thing in the sort of the Bitcoin stuff. And geez, when you're dealing with normal life, because I don't work for a Bitcoin company, I work, for sort of a mainstream company. But geez, just some of the things that you hear from people, they're just not attuned to the real world. It's quite fascinating.
Let's go there then. So you're saying you're still working in fiat land, let's say, or at least
yeah, I'm really lucky. I mean, the place that I work for is it's a very niche area. We do software in the mining industry, and great bunch of people, just a lot of really clever engineers, and they're the sort of people who I sort of deal with on a day-to-day basis. But sorry, as you're saying.
No, I was just going to say, but you've got, in your work, then you've got a connection to real things, real tangible things, which is hard to bullshit, right?
Mate, yeah. I mean, just case in point, just today or yesterday, we had a client, negotiating a contract, and they say, right, we don't want you guys to have any price increases at all over the next 10 years. Or words to that effect. And it's like you beggar, like you cannot believe it. Are you aware of the world around you? You know what I mean? And this is kind of where it's an isolated example, I know, but I mean, it's when you've done the sort of stuff that I've done, like you've done, and probably most of the folks listening to this have done, you get a pretty deep dive on monetary history, money supply, fiscal policy, monetary policy, and why inflation happens and what a scourge it is. And when you hear that in kind of real life, you got to be as nice as you can while politely saying, no, that ain't going to happen.
Yeah, that's just impossible. I mean, when I was on the other side of the fence, so I was a government procurement guy who was negotiating on behalf, and we would deliberately try and link contracts to CPI. Why? Because we knew, or at least maybe I'm giving some of my colleagues more credit than they deserve, but we knew that if we did that, essentially the price is coming down because the CPI isn't a true reflection of what's happening in life, right? So it's actually, you're getting over the course of a 3, 4, 5 year contract, you're actually getting a better and better deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a good case in point. But even that, going full circle.
But I would never have been brass-necked enough to say no price increases over 10 years.
Oh, big brass ones, isn't it? Yeah, it beggars belief. But what do you do? So, I mean, but even that is quite clever, what you were just talking about, like putting that in and, but most folks, they'll believe CPI, they'll believe that number has got some meaningful thing in their life. But then they go fill up with fuel or, see all these prices increasing all the time for most basic things. Lumber, good example, with housing and builders is probably the one that's caught my attention in recent times. Like, how can they cost a job where so many things are just changing and they're used to a particular mode of operation?
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's a million things like that that you could talk about.
You mentioned value investing, right? So
yeah.
Has learning about Bitcoin made you kind of leave that a little bit just because it's very difficult to value a business and when it doesn't have Bitcoin in the balance sheet?
There's a good question. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reality is this, and just before the show, I mentioned about, and big shout out to Pete Dunworth for the pod that you guys did a couple of weeks back. I don't listen to too many pods twice, but I listened to that one because just what he was laying down. It's great to see like a mainstream professional finance guy get Bitcoin and outline all the reasons why. For me, that is just critical. So with value investing, part of it is evaluation. Part of it is critical and risk management and just looking at all investment options. And I've heard, Pete did a fantastic job with it. I've heard Saylor do this lots of times before. But the problem that you get is trying to say, all right, for any $1 that you have, it could go into any of these places.
Yeah.
And that place needs to be better than Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then about the only thing you've got, and again, depends on your level of conviction, how much you know about it, all that, all you're really left with is diversification as your only justification for putting money anywhere else, as I see it. And so when it comes to stocks and things like that, I'm very well versed in discount cash flows and net present values and all the traditional metrics that people use to analyze and provide intrinsic value to companies. But risk is a huge thing. You're relying on company management. You're relying on so many things, counterparty risk, and it gets to a point where you say, well, why would I take on that risk? What's the upside? And this was the thing. But to your point, right, one thing I probably should say, part of the reading, like so many books on value investing, but there's one which I read quite some time ago now. It was called 100 Baggers. I can't remember who wrote it, but the name stuck with me. Which
I'll take it out,
was
put it in the notes.
Yeah, for sure. What it was basically a case study of stocks, companies that had actually done 100x.
Yep.
And what were their characteristics? Why? How? What was the journey like? How did it go? And fascinating. That's the sort of stuff that kind of makes you not too concerned when you see volatility in something like Bitcoin, because you just look at the asset. You look at, in that case, the business. Best case in point was one called Monster Beverage, which you may have heard of. Monster soft drink company.
The energy drink people?
Exactly. Yeah, they were a 100x company.
Okay.
Not that many people know this, but or care, unless you happen to have your $1 on there and come back with $100, in which case you'd be most interested.
Yeah.
So, but their journey was sort of up, down through the pit, almost going bankrupt, then up, down. And so the real question is, who would have held on for that whole period of time? Only people who kind of could value as opposed to looking at the market price. And this is fairly central, obviously, to what's going on with Bitcoin. So, that's an aspect of value investing, and that you could probably talk a lot more about that, but I think you get a message.
Yeah, and people, I mean, human nature is to sort of overextend when you think you see something good, but when you're in something that's highly volatile, that overextension, whether you're right or not in the long, well, you may be right in the long term, but in that short-term volatility period, you could be wiped out multiple times. So it's just having the convictions one thing, but also then not overextending yourself, even if you think you're right, even if you are right, to then you live to see another day type thing.
Oh, absolutely. And that speaks to the whole leverage situation. And everybody, I wouldn't say everybody, but geez, the amount of wipeouts that have happened in the last little while, certainly in kind of crypto land, and I hasten to draw the distinction between Bitcoin and crypto, but even the
Bitcoiners, right?
If they are high on leverage, they would have got wiped out just because they can't withstand the volatility, and they forget that it's a volatile asset. It's like getting angry with a dog for barking. It's what it does.
Yeah.
It's part of it. But the thing that's fascinating to me, it's probably human nature, obviously, is that folks look at a market price, like a USD or AUD market price, and they think that's value. But it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's just what we currently use to buy a loaf of bread, right? That's the reason. Or pay our rent, or fill up our tank.
There's all sorts of things implicit in it. Things like assuming efficient markets. You've heard of the efficient market hypothesis.
Yeah. I
mean, you know that. All right. Two economists walking down the street.
Go on.
You must have heard this.
No, go. Well, maybe, but go. I can't go
down the street, and both of them see $10 sitting on the sidewalk, and both of them just walk past it, assuming somebody else would have picked it up, because that's what efficient markets do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's, it's pretty ordinary sort of joke, but I mean, that's an example of efficient markets, or at least the hypothesis. They're not as efficient as people think.
Yeah, they are over the long term, maybe, but over the day to day, or week to week, month to month, or year to year, probably not. Probably not.
I mean, Charlie Munger's not covered himself in glory in recent times in Bitcoin circles, as you know, and he they actually, those guys, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, have had a lot of really good sayings, because they're basically the how would you say, the senseis of value investing. And they basically said in the short term, markets are a popularity contest, and in the long run, they're a weighing machine.
Yeah.
And
what's the old Buffett one, like, don't buy something that you're not prepared to hold for 10 years or whatever it was, that.
That's another good one. There's plenty of value in what they're saying. And another one is if you cannot stand to see the value of your holdings drop by greater than 50%, then you really shouldn't be holding them, because you don't really understand. You don't have the stomach for it to start with. And then secondary to that, you might not actually even understand what it is you're holding.
Yes.
Which is why I far prefer to look at things like metrics, look at, things like that could go into the detail of that if you like.
So with that being said about investing, do you put any value in investing in Bitcoin companies? And the reason I ask that question is, you can have this conviction, and you can want these Bitcoin companies to do very well. And so, not altruistically, but somewhat, you might want to support them getting better. But as an investment, as a put in money, get more out afterwards, is there any way you're still retaining the risk of the Bitcoin exposure because it's Bitcoin? So is there any value in investing, from your perspective? Is there any value in investing in a Bitcoin company, or should you just buy Bitcoin?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. As I said earlier, in a diversification sense, you always got to look for avenues to diversify. Now, Bitcoin companies, if you've already got a position in Bitcoin, I mean, before the boat accident, that is, but we won't talk about that. That was unfortunate. But when it comes to actually investing in companies, which are Bitcoin companies, it's not really diversified at all, because you're still basically in the same space. So I don't believe that they are things that you should have both of. It doesn't make sense, because if Bitcoin fails for whatever reason, and it could happen, let's be honest,
Yeah.
You're not diversified.
So
So it's up to the individual, and this is really important. And needless to say, not financial advice.
of course.
And each person, I strongly urge to do their own risk assessments. Every dollar that you have, you've got to sit there and think, all right, what happens if this happens? Where will you be placed? And that's so it can be a bit confronting for a few people, particularly the crew who are all in on Bitcoin. I get it. But if you listen to someone like Greg Foss, really good, risk manager, or Larry Lepard, they're the first to tell you, don't forget about risk management, guys. It's great to be bullish, but think about what happens in certain scenarios.
So where they have a luxury that I don't think is spoken about too much is both of those guys, and no criticism of them for this, but both of those guys are already wealthy, right? So they can probably take a 10% stake, and that 10% is still quite significant and will be very significant in a Bitcoin land, right? If you're just an average Joe sitting with $1,000 of saving, maybe, let's just take $1,000 of savings, to put 10% in, it's probably not going to have, if we genuinely believe in the, forever Laura and up forever and all that kind of stuff, which I do, but even at $100, it's going to take a while, right? So, probably people that are less wealthy but still have the level of conviction, and even greater conviction maybe, are more inclined to put nearer to their 1,000 in to try and get there faster, right? Do you think that's wrong? Do you think they should still have a 10? Like, should we all be allocating a percentage, or should we be based on our own wealth, or should our risk be different? Well, you tell me. What do you think?
Well, look, absolute classic standard financial management, financial advice. They start with, the very first thing they start with is show us like a bank does when you go for a loan. Show us what you owe. Show us what you own. Show us what you owe. Show us what you earn, and what your expenses are. All right. First thing everyone should do with anything to do with money.
Yep.
That I hope that's understood. From there, it's right. Now, tell us about your risk profile. Tell us about how old you are. Tell us about lots of things like that make you, and then influence your allocation and your level of risk. So if you're 100% in on a particular asset, that could well be justified and described as being high risk. Even with the most conviction you can have, what if something goes wrong? You've got to be honest about that.
What you're saying is very personal for me right now. I don't know whether you caught last week or whatever. I did
about the house.
Yes, I'm pretty deep into Bitcoin, right? But I'm selling a house, and going back to your earlier point, which was you have to go look at every other option and try and find a better, and you just can't find one. So what?
I hear you.
Right. So what do you do then? That's the issue, isn't it?
Well, look, there's a lot of folk. All right. So what you've got then is individual situations that you hear about.
Sorry, I don't mean to make this about me, but that's
no. Hey, why not? I'm talking to you. Let's make it about you.
Sure.
But a good example of this actually was at a recent Bush Bash. I was speaking to a long-time Bitcoiner, a guy who I respect immensely, a highly intelligent guy, and he was down in the dumps. He was down in the dumps because of the Bitcoin price. And I was surprised because he understood. There's nothing you can tell this guy about. He didn't have a house. He was renting, and he just said, I've been in this for this long. Why is it only at this price? This is right at the bottom end of the bear market, around 15K or 16K US. And he was down the dumps. And so, I sort of tried to cheer him up a bit, I suppose, the best I could. I certainly haven't been as long as him, but, I know a lot of the logic. And I just simply said, listen, you got to look at the fundamentals of the network, but it's a decision that you made and should not have a house because that on its own is diversification.
Yes.
If you think about it, you've got exposure to the real estate sector. You might have your views on whether that'll go up or down, given interest rates and all that sort of thing, but it's a long-term investment. And this is the difference probably between a financial decision when it comes to financial logic would suggest that you put your money to the fastest horse in the race potentially versus that diversification and maybe that warm fuzzy feeling of sleeping well at night. These are personal decisions and that's different for everybody. Now, I'm not sure if that helps you at all, but
no, I'm not necessarily thinking about myself at this point. I'm now thinking about a person listening to going, okay, well, so it's the framework for how that person then comes to the decision. You just have to look at, what are your genuine goals in life? I mean, do you want to own a yacht? Are you happy owning a bungalow? Or these sorts of things are. What's more important to you, a fancy car or a happy family, or all these sorts of questions? Not about money, just about the things that are genuinely important to you in life. And then how do you finance the things that are important to you?
And you've also got to think about, okay, what's your hypothesis here? What are you expecting to happen? If you believe a lot of the things that you read, that Bitcoin will accrue value from other asset classes, that it will grow exponentially, then you don't need to go all in. You've got room for risk management. Yeah. And it probably, as you said earlier, comes down to your scale, how much money you've got to expose yourself, how much exposure you want to take on. So we spoke about scenarios, one being it just goes pear-shaped and the whole thing, something weird happens out of left field. None of us can predict it. No one expects it. But I don't think any one of us could actually say it's impossible.
No.
What happens then?
Or anybody who does is lying to you because they don't know.
I think they're overly bullish.
Yeah.
So drink of the Kool-Aid is the expression. And you got to be kind of rational about these things. But, I think from my observations, people's conviction, and the longer they are around the asset, the more their conviction grows, the more exposure they have to the asset. And that's really the main thing that needs to be managed. The real question then is at what point do you actually change your allocations? But look, it still doesn't change anything. If you've got your $1, would you feel comfortable in buying, Woolly shares or buying Twilio, US Tech, or something on the NASDAQ, which has taken a bath in recent times? And if you're being quite honest, Bitcoin's still correlated as a risk asset.
Definitely.
And so for now, is that really, for now, because, it hasn't really penetrated financial circles that to what it really is. No one's really done the work. Hardly anyone's done the work. There are some exceptions to that, of course. The one that comes to mind is that Fidelity report, which you might have read, which was just unbelievable. And so I think we're kidding ourselves if we think those guys aren't accumulating, a lot of those big guys, but, it's not showing in the price. But that's not the point. The point is that, it's wise to consider eventualities.
Well, let's talk about that briefly then. Like you're saying, it's not showing in the price. I agree it's not showing in the price, but I also agree that these people, for all that we can be critical of the bankers in 2008 and whatever, there are some smart people working in these organizations, and once they turn their mind to it, they will understand this, and they'll understand it quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
For as long as it wasn't in their interest to understand it, they'll not even try, and that's a different thing. But once they look, and they get it, they will allocate, and they will allocate massively. So,
relatively massively, but for them, it's a drop in the bucket.
Absolutely, but in terms of Bitcoin, it's massive.
Oh, for sure. I mean, Pete did that. Pete Dunworth did that fantastic illustration of what was it? A couple of billion had an exponential price increase on the market cap of Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So that means if a fund manager wakes up and decides, I need to take a piece here.
Yeah,
they're going to drop some large money, particularly some of these pension funds. And there's been some stuff about that. So think about that. Like some of those big pension funds in the US, you hear stories about the actual managers of those later being labeled clinically insane. they're wined and dined by the investment bankers, and there you go, take the money and do whatever you want with it. And that's where all those fruity derivatives come from, and some of that skullduggery that led to 2008. So that kind of thing is there. But look, it will happen. At least that's the thesis anyway. It should happen. And I'm probably among that crew that expect one day that you'll wake up and all of a sudden there's this gigantic green candle because something's happened. I can't tell you what that thing would be, but it could be a good number of things.
So do you think we're not seeing it in the price? I mean, I know we've had a little bit of movement in price, but do you think we're not seeing it in price because they are not yet accumulating, or do you think it's to do with paper Bitcoin?
There's a few aspects. All right, so most people's idea of value is market price, as we were discussing earlier. But the reality is that as an asset class, it's very small comparatively. So I had the stats up before, but about 400 billion US or something along those
like
lines.
that, mate, yeah.
Well, which is a thimble.
Yes.
So, and it's also associated big picture with growth stocks. And when the US Fed has still got their foot on the brake, that's, and interest rates rising, they're not pressing the print button just yet. And so, it is what it is. But that's where it's really important, an understanding of how these things work. And let's not forget about the skullduggery of Sam Bankman-Fried and others who might be like him in terms of rehypothecation of Bitcoin, paper Bitcoin, which is, that was his playbook, basically, just selling Bitcoin that didn't exist. And it was just theft. And it's, unfortunately makes me a bit sick to my stomach about some of the actions. But let's say there are others out there who are probably still doing the same thing.
Definitely. I think there definitely are people doing the same thing.
And I don't think
how big that problem is. It's hard to quantify. You couldn't quantify.
And you can't. So all you can do is look at the basics of supply and demand. And in that particular case, there was artificial supply where there was clear demand.
Yeah.
So, okay, it's no different to the gold market. They've been doing that in the gold market for years and years and years, and it's very mature as far as just basically artificially setting the gold price. Mm-hmm. That's another whole rabbit hole we won't go down. Yeah. But there's plenty of literature online about that, about how that works, and it's no secret either. That could easily change as well fairly soon with some of the BRICS stuff that's going on. If you've been following that,
BRICS as in Russia, India, China, Brazil. Is that what we said? BRICS?
Yeah, BRICS. Yeah, moving away
South Africa,
from the London Metal Exchange and some of the skullduggery that goes on over there. Because for a long time, like it's what, 2,000 an ounce at the moment for gold, and dangerously close to going back to monetary history here, where it used to be $35 an ounce, and the whole 1971 thing and departure from the gold standard. But, with the amount of money they've printed since 1971, where the US dollar has basically deflated 98% of its value, back to your cunning as a purchasing manager, which goes straight into that. But it should be around 80,000 per ounce for gold, but it's been held down, and they're probably not quite at that point with Bitcoin yet, but they're certainly no fools when it comes to manipulation.
Well, I think what's going to be the rug pull on gold, not to massively go off on a tangent, but because we're seeing tensions around the world, inter-country tensions, sort of globalization, countries starting to want to trade in different currency. All of a sudden, that means of control will lessen, and then all of a sudden, people will start to realize that the physical metal is important again, and then we might see the price run. So it's like like a bank run on gold, if you like.
It's commodities. It's commodities. At the end of the day, give me something of value for the thing that I have of value.
Yes.
So value for value.
Yes.
And I'll sell my oil for well, it won't be a US dollar. What will it be? All right. Well, what can you do for me? What can you do for me to China? Yeah, well, we manufacture a lot of stuff. All right, no worries. We'll take your yuan. India, I don't know. There'll be something which they trade if they trade for their local currencies. Otherwise, just give us gold. No problem. And it won't take too long before that turns into Bitcoin because it's easier to transport. I think we all know that. That's part of the thesis. It's part of the theory that's going on here. And as time goes by, and you just look at I'm a big fan of some of the work of Parker Lewis in the US. You'd be familiar with a lot of his stuff. But gradually and suddenly, he's up to part 19 now, I believe.
Is that what we're up 19?
Yeah. I actually flicked him some sats the other day. Just the last one that he did. It's just top shelf, and basically one of the big things he has as a sort of cornerstone of his argument is the amount of debt which is in the system and the amount of US dollars that there are to service that debt.
Mm-hmm.
And as a very rough illustration, for every $1 US that's actually present, there's $10 of debt. So if you think about a requirement to pay for the interest, let alone additional spending, of which was $2 trillion just current year in the US, which they overspend. Hello.
Yeah.
What do you think they're going to do? They're going to print money. Don't even talk to me about a debt ceiling. That's all right. We'll let that one slip through to the keeper.
Oh yeah,
the artificial debt ceiling. But that's what happens, and they're just so used to it that they can't really change it. And so all we're doing is setting a wet sail in front of a macro tailwind.
But the numbers
really
are just so large now. They're becoming unignorable now. The numbers are just so large. In terms of what like comparing them against other large numbers like a US defense budget or that what I mean?
I hear you. Like once it gets to that level, but I still go full circle back to your average, pleb, your average Joe Normal. Does he know about that stuff? Does he care? All he's doing is scratching his head saying, I wonder where all this inflation's coming from. I wonder why my builder, like as a builder, why does my lumber cost more? I wonder why that is. And
somebody's ripping me off somewhere, but they don't know where.
No, they just can't work it out. And I'm not saying that I've got all the answers by any means, but I certainly like listening to guys who have done a lot of study and research and are more than happy to express their views. And it offers an explanation. And it's only through that explanation that the reasonable person sets a hypothesis, an investment hypothesis. And that's, Bitcoin doesn't care about any of that stuff. It just sits there and says, like Wiz says, you've got signal, boom, 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 every 10 minutes. And then you've got crazy land with all of the things that go on with the things that everyone's used to do with fake debt ceilings, to do with spending more money than you earn. There's a reason why certain folk gravitate towards Bitcoin and sleep well at night, because there's just less variables to worry about.
Yeah, the signal noise GIF or meme or whatever you want to call it by Star Fury does that, and it's brilliant. Yeah. It's
pretty comforting, that one.
It just tells you it just explains so much of what you feel in a picture. It's incredible, right?
It is. That's why I love it. That's where it came from. I only sort of saw it through Wiz, but and he flushes it up at every push bash. And it's the kind of thing that just sort of, it's interesting because what it does, it leads you sort of to a place which is out of sort of the wilderness and into a place of hope, I suppose you would say, which is actually a feeling that you're not having to weigh up all of these variables and all of these things. You just simply keep your Bitcoin in cold storage and you sleep well at night and let all this other stuff do whatever this stuff does. Yeah, that's sort of how I look at it.
Yeah, humbly wait with patience is try your best.
But that's where it comes down to the individual, doesn't it? About how how old they are, like whether they've got time. I always like to sort of discuss this, I suppose, with folks who aren't really Bitcoin people. if they're willing to entertain the discussion, which not everybody is. But I like to sort of talk to folks who are like finance people or whatever and hear their arguments. And their primary argument is, what if it fails? What about the risk? And you say, okay, well, what about the risk of banks failing? What about the risk of a lot of traditional stocks associated with industries becoming disintermediated? Is that the term? Basically getting Kodak when the digital photo came along. You're blockbusted, that's the kind of thing. And you sort of have to have a look at that fairly carefully and say, right, okay. But then it just comes down to allocation as to whether you think, because I'm going to tell you this, and you'll know this, it's pretty basic. Western Union, money transfer type people for overseas remittances, banks, the whole financial advice industry, MasterCard, Visa. Look over your shoulder. There's a lot of industries that are going to be impacted here because Bitcoin's not going away.
Yeah, I'd like to. It'd be interesting to watch those. You mentioned MasterCard, Visa, Western Union. Be very interesting to watch. I mean, Visa has actually, Visa are facilitating the Fold card, for example. So they are starting to put their feelers out. They're basically a little, tiny little hedge just to see what's happening over here. That's interesting to me. I've not seen anything like that out of MasterCard or Western Union. Maybe they're just head in the sand, sweets in the aisle, and Blockbuster. I don't know, but or maybe they're doing something behind the scenes. You don't know, but
you don't know, and this is the main thing. Some people are extremely good at expressing themselves. If you really listen to someone like Michael Saylor, and so I've heard a lot of people don't like him for various reasons, and that's up to the individual. But in terms of articulating a position, articulating an argument, you won't hear anybody better just for that skill alone.
Yeah, there are no superfluous words, right?
It's sound bites, for the 60-second crew on CNN.
Yeah.
Keep it concise. Bang, done, got it. That's it. But, when it comes to all of that, and even with those guys right now, as you know, that he's turned his business from what was probably an old business intelligence firm. He quickly turned it into basically the company treasury holding Bitcoin, which is a pretty strong move on its own. But now I understand he's actually moving to develop Lightning products as part of his business. And so he gets it. And he also knows basically it's already happened. It's just people haven't actually seen it yet.
Yeah.
And you mentioned on your last pod, I think, about that Philippines one, with Strike. So Pouch was the name of the company, Pouch in the Philippines, who they partnered up.
That's the other end. That's the Philippine end.
Absolutely, yeah.
What do you say, Pouch? So, Pouch?
Pouch.
Oh, I did not know that. Thank you.
Yeah. So, and they have got the links into the traditional banking system. So the reason I mentioned Michael Saylor is because he goes to great lengths to say this won't kill the US dollar. He doesn't say it exactly, but he doesn't ever go out and say that because that will attract politicians and and just wait for the whole wave of nationalism and patriotism and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. He's too smart to say it. I don't believe he believes it. I think he's just too smart to say it.
No, exactly.
I mean, it's not going to happen tomorrow anyway, so it's irrelevant. So, and then this,
but that's the whole point. All he knows is that it doesn't die. As long as it doesn't die, it's fine. As long as they don't do some crazy regulation in the US, which is obviously the biggest capital market on the planet.
Yeah.
As long as things keep sane, and he'll do whatever he can. Let's be honest. He's feathering his own nest. He's no fool. And will quite likely be the richest guy on the planet before much time goes by. But, he wants to do what he can to ensure that. But, what he's trying to do is not attract the ire of regulators, of, people who would accuse him of being anti-American, of non-patriotic, through assassinating the US dollar. That's how I see it. and he's extremely clever if you listen to the way he talks.
Absolutely.
So in other words, let them both live, and
Yeah.
we'll just see where the capital goes.
Yeah. So let me take that on. Let's go with a final question. Let's take it on a slightly different angle then. We talk about sort of American ideals and free speech and hope and that kind of thing. Noster, what is your experience so far? How much have you used it? What's your thought? I haven't used it at all. I obviously see what's happening on Twitter. Haven't touched it yet. But people seem incredibly bullish. Are you the same, or what are you seeing?
Yeah. All right. So for those who are not 100% sure what that is, so NOSTR is the name of it, Noster, and what is it? It's a network of open something relays, but basically it's a decentralized Twitter. Now, a lot of folks got their nose out of joint in relation to a lot of the censorship that was taking place on Twitter, and that's pretty much what forced this thing into existence. Now, it's early days, but my observations are it changes every day. So I look at it, fairly regularly, and it's incredible. I mean, the very first thing that slapped me in the face was Jack Dorsey. All right, and he's Mr. One Word on Twitter, and then you go over to Nostra, and there he is. He's like 7 pints in, singing, and he's just in his element. And Snowden, he joined the other day, and he was showered with sats because natively Lightning is built into this thing. In other words, it's being built the way a lot of folks want Twitter to be built.
Explain that to me. Sorry, you can create a Lightning invoice. You have a Lightning address, or how is that showering with that stuff?
All right, so all right. So for starters, I'm not an architect in this product, but I'll tell you my perceptions of it.
Yeah.
Every person, when they set it up, and Bitcoiners get this quickly because you've got the private and public keys.
Mm-hmm.
That literally is your identity. And yeah, there's a lot can be said about that in other areas to do with all kinds of identity management and all that kind of thing. But for the sake of Nostr, you are a public key, and you've also got a private key. But you also basically set up a Lightning wallet. So in other words, anyone at any time can be sending you sats. So sending you Bitcoin. And they can do that just through knowing your public key. And if they like something that you've done, they like a post or whatever, bingo, there's money in your account. It's very similar actually to the I had the good privilege of catching up with the Perth Heat guys when they were in Brisbane just recently, and sat down with Steve just because I'm just blown away by what those guys have done incorporating Bitcoin into their organization. And they introduced this thing called Sats for Stats, which is basically a guy hits a home run or does something good, and up comes a QR code, and bingo, anyone can send them sats, send them money, just because they're showing appreciation. It's not just hand clapping, it's something material. The guy can go back to his phone, back at the dugout, and go, oh man, look at that. And that's just revolutionary in sports. And Nostr, when it comes to what they're doing there, is basically instant payment for content. And it's exploding. It's going crazy. And my observations are heaps of guys are transitioning away from Twitter across onto Nostr. You see it, like a lot of guys who used to post a lot, they don't anymore. And you see them over on Nostr. Jeff Booth's probably a good example, definitely Jack Dorsey, and a lot of those guys, because they know what the future looks like, and it's value for value.
So if
there's a lot more we can say about it, but it's early days, and I'm still finding my way around through it, but it's definitely promising. So you can't kill it. It's an open source protocol.
Yep.
Just like Bitcoin.
If I think you and I we're probably going to continue this conversation, but for the sake of the pod, I'll round us up just now. But can you how would somebody go about finding you on Nostr? Let's start there.
What you do is you do a handle, and for me, it's the same as my Twitter handle, which is at Gazlarking. GAZLARKING. And that's it. That's how you find me. DMs are open if you want to have a chat. Always happy to talk the corn, as it were.
Awesome, mate. We'll put your Noster public key in the show notes. Go follow Gaz, send him some sats and ask him some questions. He's a really good guy, sensible, thoughtful guy to listen to, Maz. I really appreciate the conversation. And yeah, hopefully we'll finish this up, but we'll continue the drink, shall we?
No worries, mate.
Thank you, mate. Cheers.